Good morning, YouTube. Well, actually, it's the afternoon for you, but Bryce here, your favorite aircraft mechanic and IA and Part 147 instructor, back with another video. And this time, I'm going to be talking about why so many mechanics despise the Mooney. Stick around. Before you jump in the comments screaming, despise is a strong word, and I don't hate Mooneys, I think they're the greatest thing in the world, this video is about why some mechanics do not like Mooneys and why I hear so many people say that they hate working on them. Now, me personally, I love Mooneys. They are my favorite aircraft. If I owned an aircraft, it would probably be an M20J, and I will explain more about why an M20J a little bit later. But this Mooney that I'm sitting on right now is one of my client's aircraft. This is a K model, and it has a Rocket Engineering STC on it, so it has a 520 cubic inch Continental engine with 305 horsepower and a really big for the aircraft turbocharger. As you can see with this Rocket Engineering STC on here, this is a very, very big engine for this aircraft, and it is not original to the K model Mooney. The K model Mooney actually came with a TSIO 360, which is a 6-cylinder Continental, but it is considerably smaller than this one. 360 cubic inches is obviously smaller than 520 cubic inches. But this Mooney suffers from a problem that all Mooneys suffer from, which is accessibility. And even worse so, because it has the Rocket Engineering STC, as well as an extended range baggage compartment on it, there is simply no room to work on anything. And I'll show you what I mean. Even a task as simple as changing the oil, the filter is up in here underneath the intercooler. Now, it's almost better, and in my opinion is better, so it's what I do, to just go ahead and remove this intercooler and get it out of your way in order to change the oil filter, which is down in here. And it's more than just that. There's so many lines and fittings and pieces and electrical wires, because it has a JPI in it, all just tucked in here as tight as they can possibly make it, because the aircraft was never designed to have an engine this large in here. And it's been crammed in there with very little room to spare, if not almost no room to spare, just for the sake of going 200 miles an hour. And yes, it's very cool, but it does make it very, very difficult to work on. But I'm not here to brag about how cool this airplane is. I'm here to tell you why so many mechanics don't like working on them. And like I said, with the oil filter, there is no accessibility, especially with this particular Mooney, because of how heavily it has been modified. And I'll give you one example. The suction relief filter, which is very imperative that it gets changed every year and at each 100-hour inspection, is a small foam filter that goes around the suction relief valve, which allows extra air into the vacuum pump to keep the vacuum consistent at 5.2 inches of mercury. So that sits all the way at the top of the firewall. Well, it's actually on this side, but all the way at the top of the firewall behind the panel. And in this aircraft, there is so much underneath here. I did a short of it the other day that in order to change it, I actually ended up pulling the glare shield and several pieces of equipment. I ended up taking them loose so I could sort of manipulate them out of the way in order to change one filter. And what would take me maybe 5 minutes in a 172 took me about 30 minutes in this Mooney. Now, you say, how could you go through all that work and still love them? And the truth is, Mooneys are kind of like redheads to me. I love redheads. I think they're really neat, and that's why I married one. And Mooneys are the same way. They were designed and built by some good old boys in Kerrville, Texas. They were built very good in the sense that they have a steel tube structure inside them like you would on a old fabric airplane or a crop duster or something that's very robust, which in my opinion Mooneys are very robust. And then they put an aluminum skin around it. And yes, it's very difficult to work on, but so is a Corvette, and people love them. But I do want to add that there are some things that Mooney aircraft did right. And one of the things that they did right was this structure underneath the belly. And you'll see this is the structure right here. This is the structure of the aircraft. This is your rudder control. This one right here is your landing gear, and your ailerons are going to be further back, but ailerons are in here as well. And why am I showing you all of this? By the way, this is the gear motor. Well, first you will notice that on the later models, you can remove the entire belly panel to expose all of this and work on it. So yeah, it's really snug under here and you have to lay on the hangar floor, but you're given infinite access to these controls, and they're all push-pull rods, which means unlike a Cessna 172 or an easier to work on airplane, you don't have to worry about temperature compensation during cable checks, and you don't have to worry about the cable tensions fluctuating throughout the year. Which is a good thing if you live somewhere like Texas, like I do, because in Texas, although it's not very cold, it gets down to a consistent 40 degrees in the winter and up to a consistent 100 degrees in the winter. And a 60-degree swing throughout the year is enough to affect the cable tensions through an aircraft by about 5 to 10 pounds, depending on how long those cables are. I know because I've seen it. So with that, the construction of a Mooney makes sense. Yes, they are very difficult to work on. Yes, they are difficult to service, but how they were constructed makes a lot of sense. And I'll show you another example. We are now standing by one of the coolest tails in general aviation. And not only is it cool in how it looks, it's also really cool in how it is constructed. You see, what Mooney did when they designed this, instead of putting ribs inside this control surface because of how narrow it is, they put a rounded front end on it. You can see the rivets here. And then they stamped a piece of skin with these sort of dimples in them. And those dimples come together and are riveted here. So there is no inner structure inside this tail. It's just two pieces of skin and then a piece of half round on the front. This rudder is 3 pieces. And I'm sorry to keep picking on Cessnas, but if it was a Cessna, you would have your forward spar, you would have your aft seam, and then you would have a series of ribs inside the rudder, which means if the rudder is ever damaged and you have to repair it, it's a pain in the butt to replace all of those rivets. Now, I've never had to skin a Mooney's tail control surface, but if I did, you could drill all these rivets and pull the skin off and then drill and put them all back in and repaint it very easily. Again, they may not be the easiest things to work on, but how they were constructed just makes sense. I did say towards the beginning of this video that if I could afford a Mooney aircraft, that the Mooney I would probably own would be an M20J, and here's why. Some of the earlier Mooneys are smaller. They're smaller in the cabin, they're smaller in the engine, they're smaller in a lot of different places. The cowling design is very different. They're still very good airplanes. Anybody who has a vintage Mooney, thank you so much for keeping that thing airworthy. But the M20J is my personal favorite, and here's why. It has a Lycoming IO360 on it. It's almost identical in fuselage shape and size to this K behind me. So the fuselage is very comfortable. There's plenty of headroom. People complain about headroom in a Mooney a lot, but I don't really think it's that bad. I am 5'9" and I am all torso, but that's here nor there. The Mooney has, like I said, it has an IO360 on it. It's plenty of comfort in the cabin, but it has that laminar wing design. And yes, you cannot get it slow. Yes, you cannot get it slow in turn or it will spin, as I did have a client's aircraft do that several years ago, which left him and his wife very, very badly injured, and he no longer flies. It was heartbreaking because it happened right after an annual inspection, and it was terrifying, one of the most terrifying moments of my career. But you cannot turn final in a Mooney at 50 miles an hour and expect it to stay in the air. So they are very much point and shoot aircraft, and they are not the safest thing in the world, but they are fast. And if you're worried about fuel efficiency, there are very few aircraft more fuel efficient than a Mooney M20J, and I will explain that. They will burn about 9 to 10 gallons per hour full rich and will cruise about 160 miles an hour. Now, when you do the comparison on that, when you do the comparison of that fuel burn at that mile an hour, you will find that it is more fuel efficient than a 172. It is more fuel efficient than a 182. It is more fuel efficient than a Piper Arrow. It is more fuel efficient than a lot of things. And for this reason, I like the Mooney J the best. It is the most fuel efficient one when you compare speed to engine fuel burn, and it is decently roomy. I guess that's how you would say that. It has a decent room in the cabin, decent baggage, decent useful load. Is it the best performing aircraft in the world? No, nothing is. Everything is a compromise. However, in my opinion, the Mooney M20J is the most fuel efficient, which is why that is the one that I would buy. Now, don't get confused. we did some calculations, or I should say I did some calculations on this rocket Mooney behind me. This rocket Mooney burns about 15 gallons per hour, about 14 and a half gallons per hour, and will cruise at a solid 215 miles per hour, or 215 knots, I should say, which is very, very, very fast. It's also turbocharged, so it can go up to 17,000, 18,000 feet if that's what brings you joy and happiness in your heart, where it's even more efficient. And when you look at those numbers, yes, that is a huge fuel burn. But the owner of this aircraft went from Scottsdale, Arizona to San Antonio in 3.5 hours. If he had been in a Cessna 172, that would have taken him 7 hours. So when we compare the fuel burns of the two aircraft, we actually find that even though this thing has a 520 cubic inch engine on it and burns 14 gallons an hour, that over the course of the trip, it burned the exact same amount of fuel that you would have burned flying a 172 from Scottsdale, Arizona to San Antonio, Texas. And that is, again, fuel efficiency, all because of the wing design. Yes, there are some compromises you have to make if you want to own a Mooney aircraft, but they are one of my favorite aircrafts. And if you're looking for a mechanic to work on your Mooney, no, it's not me. I have a very exclusive client base. But if you're looking for a mechanic to work on your Mooney, I suggest two things. Find a mechanic who is both very knowledgeable in them, but who also loves them, like I do. If you find a mechanic and all he does is complain about how much he hates Mooneys and he hates working on them, he's probably a great mechanic, but he's not the mechanic you want working on the airplane per se. You want to find somebody who does genuinely like the aircraft like I do, because they're going to care more about making sure that it's done right and that it is safe. So there you go, everybody. I'm currently waiting for the owner to get here. We're going to finish up this annual inspection. There are just a couple of things left to do, and then we are going to sign off the records and take this thing for a flight. I'm going to be interviewing him. That video probably released before that video, but it is the Mooney rocket better than the Mooney Bravo? And I'm going to talk about him with both, as he has flown both, as he has looked at purchasing both. He obviously purchased a rocket, but we did a whole video on that. So as always, if you liked it, make sure to leave us a like, leave us a comment, subscribe. If you disagree with anything I said, feel free to put that down in the comments. Just as always, I ask that you stay respectful and we can have a good conversation about Mooney aircraft. Like I said, I do love them, so know that you are coming for my child. You are attacking my children. But leave us a like, leave us a comment. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram and join the Discord. Thank you so much for watching. As always, go build something and be easy. That's going in a blooper reel at the end of the video.